Good morning, everyone. My name is Luz Rodriguez. I'm a social protection specialist working for the World Bank in the Latin American and Caribbean region. I'm connecting from Bogota, Colombia. And today I have the pleasure and the honor to moderate this webinar on Blue Social Protection. This webinar is jointly organized by the Environment and the Social Protection teams of the World Bank in a collaboration with the International Institute for the Environment and Development. We are also pleased to have the Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, who has been an important partner and a key player in the field. Some of you may remember that we had another webinar in November 2024, which focused on 5 case studies. Today's webinar will focus on how we can support more countries in leveraging social protection and jobs interventions for sustainable fisheries through a cross-sectoral approach. In today's webinar, we will learn about the handbook, which was specifically prepared to those who are working at country level on the social protection and fisheries sector. We will also be learning about the countries where relevant dialogues and integrated approaches are taking place with support from the World Bank, FAO, and the International Institute for the Environment and Development. At the beginning, we will have Yuko Okamura, who will provide an overview of this work. Yuko is a senior economist at the World Bank Social Protection Team. She's currently in DC, Washington, DC, and has been leading this work since 2020. After Yuko, we will have the presentation of the handbook by a joint team composed by Annabelle Blandon, who's a London-based senior researcher at the International Institute for Environment and Development. Annabelle leads work on fisheries and aquatic food systems, and she specializes in incentive-based approaches. Also, she will be joined by Gianluigi Nico, an economist from the World Bank Social Protection and Jobs team. He's based in Rome, and he has extensive experience on employment in small-scale fisheries. Also, they will be joined by Ganila Gregg, also a World Bank Social Protection and Jobs team member. She's advising the teams on these intersections of fisheries and social protection, and she's connecting from Gothenburg in Sweden. Once they present the handbook, we will have the chance to hear from the FAO and the International Institute for Environment and Development partners, and they will share with us what is the work that they are doing with countries on technical assistance programs. Annabelle will be joined by Daniela Kalikowski, a fisheries officer at the FAO. Daniela is leading Equitable Livelihoods team within the Fisheries and Aquaculture Division. Daniela focuses on integrating social protection and improving working conditions in the fisheries sector with the aim of having more inclusive, equitable, and sustainable livelihoods. At the end of the meeting, we will have 10 minutes for questions and comments from the audience. I want to remind the audience that the main objective of this webinar is to connect with colleagues who have been working at the country level, since the World Bank is willing to support more countries on the PROBLUE agenda. We want this to be an interactive event, so please send us your questions and comments in the chat about your relevant work in this area. The team will do their best to respond as many comments as possible, and also they will be following up after the meeting. So without further ado, I will give the floor to Yuko. I will remind the presenters to stick to your times, and yeah, go ahead, Yuko.
Thank you very much, Luz. And hi, everybody. Great pleasure to see you all. And let me start with the presentation, giving the overview of this Blue Social Protection Program in terms of what has been already done and what's the plan forward. Next slide, please. So, as Luz already articulated where we stand, and today's presentations, webinar is really focusing on how we can support more countries in adopting the intersectoral approach to social protections and the fisheries. But it really builds up upon the preceding activities since 2020. And it actually started with a quick stock taking and of the examples of how social protection, the labor market interventions has been adapted to the fishery context. And bring that conceptual framework to the reality. 5-country case study has been conducted across the different regions. And through that process, we did find some of the very good example. For example, cash transfers being adapted to the clauses for the fishery regulations. Social insurance really supported expanding the social insurance coverage among the fishery workers through the fishery association. But however, these cases are fairly limited despite the potential. And this has been also like a concerted effort of the people working from the different sector, coming from the different background and also the different mindset. So there is also like a challenges, understanding the differences, but also we thought it embraced the opportunity as a team. So in that sense, this handbook really distills and the concept it's a really the essence of the information we had the wish to have known through the process. And we really want to share with this information with the broader people who are facing like this kind of frontier issues, so that it will make it easier for those who have a similar mind to proceed this and advance this agenda at the country level. And I really would like to acknowledge like PROBLUE support has been instrumental, and really this has been the concerted effort again from the different teams within the World Bank, but also the partner including IIED and also the FAO, who has been also key players in this field. And together with, we also would like to acknowledge the support from the Iceland, who provided the expert in this process of preparing the handbook. The next slide, please. So what's the plan to support more countries? So we have proposed the planned activities, starting with the community practice, which we hope to be the platform of the exchanging the knowledge and the information. And we are thinking that can actually start with more focusing the World Bank internal, while some of the activities should of course open to the external partners and people. And excuse me. Mute the microphone. Those who are connected, yeah.
Yeah, there's somebody who needs to close your mic.
And in addition to, in addition to the broader exchange knowledge in terms of the webinar and the mini clinic, we also think it's important to have a tailored advisory service to the country team, who are actually in the process of the dialogue, identify the project, implementing the project with supporting the client through the World Bank operations. So in that sense, we hope to have a kind of the reference point which can be the contact point to like support what are the relevant example information, as well as potentially the expert who can join the missions and the technical discussions and dialogue. And in parallel, the third component is called how to resources, which can be actually another practical guidance note on the selected topics where the community practice and members share like questions in common. And so that's our plan for the next year and year also. And we also need your feedback inputs. That's also the reason we are organizing this conversation today. Slide, please. So the question is, which are these countries? Where are the country demands? So based on our preliminary kind of like exercise, there are about 30 countries where the World Banks are engaged through the active or pipeline operations or analytical ASA work, what we call, and also initial dialogue with the clients, with the Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Social Affairs, and Labor, so on. And we also map target countries of key partners, IIED, FAO, where we have opportunity to hear more from them in terms of what are the scope and the engagement through their technical assistance program. And they are also interested in exploring the partnership with the World Bank if there is alignment with our engagement in the sector. And example, like scope of the engagement also varies across the countries. For example, just for illustrative purpose, not exhaustive list, Costa Rica, they are also looking at the social registry, how to enhance the georeferences, understanding the profile of the fishery workers and fishery communities to better understand the needs and the socioeconomic risks and vulnerability. And another example, Kenya, that project is linked with the youth economic project. Similarly, Sri Lanka, the engagement has been around the economic inclusion pilots, which covers the coastal communities. And there are also another example where the entry point is the food and nutrition security, like Komoro, where the focus is like aquatic food value chains and how to improve the food productions and nutrition values. And so we acknowledge this list is not exhaustive and preliminary and things are moving. That's exactly why we organize this conversation, and we would like to hear from you. So please do reach out to us. And for the post-webinar package, you will be also receiving the PowerPoint presentations and the links to the handbook. And in that email, we plan to include the link to a quick survey to ask your work and interest. So please stay tuned, and so that this is going to be the important step for us to plan who are actually the members, certain members, and what are the potential interests around which we're going to be all organizing the initial sessions and so on. So with this, let me hand over to my dear team who will be presenting the handbook. Over to you, Annabelle.
Hi, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be introducing this handbook. I'm going to kick us off and then hand over to my bank colleagues. Next slide, please. So before we get into it, I just want to make sure that everyone is clear on some key terms, particularly fisheries people and anyone outside of the bank. So social protection is the set of policies, systems, and programs that aim to prevent or protect people from poverty and vulnerability. And it can be provided through social assistance for low-income households, social insurance, which is contributory, so for formal workers, social services, so benefits like childcare, and labour market interventions, which are designed to protect and support workers. The jobs bit includes not only these supply side labour market interventions, but also the complementary demand side interventions that help to create more jobs and connect workers to them. And then to collectively describe all of these components, the bank and therefore this handbook uses social protection and jobs, or SPJ. One more thing to highlight is that we focus mostly in this handbook on formal social protection, so that which is government backed and guided by legal frameworks. But we also recognise the role of informal mechanisms provided by individuals or groups such as NGOs or community-based organisations, which can be really crucial in the fisheries sector. This slide is just one example, or if you just go back one, this slide is just one example of how many concepts and technical terms that you really need to understand to work across these sectors. And we realized when we started this work that fisheries people and social protection people basically speak different languages. And so against all advice, we included quite a lengthy glossary section at the start of this handbook before the main text. It's not a conventional glossary, it's not in alphabetical order, but instead it tries to kind of weave key terms and concepts into a narrative, clarifying differences in usage throughout. So you can skip right over it, but we hope it will be a really useful resource for those who are new to either sector. Next slide. So following the glossary, the handbook has 5 main sections. It starts with an introduction, a problem statement which sets out why an intersectoral approach is needed, a conceptual framework which outlines the main ways that social protection can be used to address this problem, a section on methodology and data sources, so what information is needed to implement the approach and how can it be obtained, and finally priorities moving forward. Next slide. Here's just a quick overview of the introduction. So to reiterate, the aim of the handbook is to provide practical knowledge on leveraging SPJ interventions to support more productive and sustainable fisheries and associated benefits. What's the rationale? Fisheries are crucial, not only for the people who rely on them directly, but also for wider society. So they make huge contributions, particularly to food security and nutrition, poverty reduction and prevention, climate action, and nature conservation. But fish stocks are declining globally, and this puts those benefits at risk. And based on evidence from a range of sectors, including agriculture and forestry, we believe that SPJ interventions have underutilized potential to support fisheries policy reforms and management measures. And we're often asked the question, why would countries prioritize the fisheries sector for more effective SPJ when there are so many other sectors and groups in need, particularly in the context of fiscal constraints? And the answer goes back to those broader societal contributions. What's the audience? This handbook is primarily targeted at people looking for innovative ways to support sustainable fisheries. So this includes practitioners working within and with ministries responsible for fisheries, social protection and finance, as well as stakeholders and development partners working with them. In terms of scope, the handbook focuses on the small-scale fisheries sector specifically, which supports the majority of people who are involved in fisheries. But the handbook is flexible enough to be used for a range of purposes, whether practitioners are trying to improve small-scale fisheries on a national level or trying to address a specific problem in a specific fishery or area. And while we wanted this resource to be very usable and short and snappy, what we found along the way is a lack of understanding not only of how to do this, but also why you would want to. And so there's maybe a bigger emphasis on knowledge in this handbook than we had originally planned, but we hope it really comprehensively maps out both the how and the why. Next slide. So moving to the problem statement, this section of the handbook outlines in detail why a more intersectoral approach is needed, centered around this concept of risk based on the IPCC climate risk framework. So what you see here is the fisheries sector as a social ecological system. And what all of these many arrows try to show is that people in the fisheries sector face a range of vulnerabilities and risks arising from interlinked socioeconomic and ecological processes. I can't talk through it in detail, but I'll draw your attention to a few key points. So starting kind of middle bottom, human activities are increasingly driving changes in those natural systems that reshape socioeconomic risks in the fisheries sector by increasing ecological hazards. So in the ocean, this is primarily due to intense fishing pressure, compounded by other drivers of ecological change, such as climate change and coastal development. Moving over to the right, we also have the socioeconomic drivers of risk that act on vulnerability or exposure to hazards. The mostly informal nature of the small-scale fisheries sector means that fishers and fish workers often face a range of structural constraints and inequities that fuel vulnerability to climate hazards and other shocks, particularly for certain groups such as Indigenous peoples, women, and youth. So examples include limited access to public services and finance, unclear tenure rights, and inequitable shares of the costs and benefits of policy reform. And that's the key problem we want to address here. So fisheries management and conservation measures, while critical in the long term, can have substantial costs for fisheries workers and their households in the short to medium term. For example, seasonal and spatial closures, gear restrictions, they can all lead to lost income. And the lack of support for dealing with these costs can reduce acceptance of and compliance with these measures and undermine their effectiveness. And then moving further to the right, you can see some of the institutional and policy challenges that underpin this problem. So in short, current efforts to manage fisheries are really limited by short-term perspectives, leading to inadequate institutional coordination, incoherent policies on fisheries and SPJ, and insufficient or misguided investment. Next slide, please. So moving to our conceptual framework, this illustrates what we see as the three main opportunities to leverage SPJ interventions for productive and sustainable fisheries. I'm going to start with the middle right-hand box C, which is our primary interest. So SPJ interventions can be deliberately designed or adapted to directly incentivize specific behavior changes that support fisheries policy objectives and associated management measures. So these interventions target fisheries workers, and benefits or services really need to be conditional on those behavior changes. Moving to the left, box B, even when an SPJ intervention is not directly linked to any specific fisheries policy objective or associated behavior change, it can still help to create enabling conditions for sustainable fisheries. So governments can leverage existing and mainstream SPJ programs that focus on general poverty reduction and shock response, for example, by adjusting eligibility criteria to extend coverage to fisheries households, which should in turn influence motivations for environmental stewardship. But it should be noted, these approaches in particular can also increase fishing effort if interventions are not in some way aligned and coordinated with fisheries policy and complemented by proper monitoring and enforcement of management measures. And then jumping back up to the top, box A, SPJ benefits and services can also help enable and incentivize fisheries actors to register themselves, their assets and their activities. And this registration can provide data that are fundamental to fisheries management and can also inform SPJ program design and support implementation in the fisheries sector. So this is kind of a foundational step. Next slide. This one just gives a little more detail on opportunities B and C, each of which have two main avenues. In the interest of time, I'm just going to focus in on that right-hand box, so how SPJ interventions can be used to provide direct incentives. So firstly, when new management measures such as seasonal closures are introduced to reduce catch and effort in the short or medium term, SPJ programs such as conditional transfers, public works and temporary unemployment benefits can compensate for the short to medium term costs that are incurred. But where longer term interventions are required to reduce the total numbers of fisheries workers, for example, where a stock has collapsed or is in recovery, SPJ can facilitate livelihood diversification and labour market transformation. Instruments that are appropriate here include active labour market programs, economic inclusion approaches, complementary financial services, and early retirement packages. Now I'm just going to hand over to Gianluigi on methodology and data sources.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Annabelle. Good morning, afternoon, everybody. And I'm now gonna shift focus to data and methodology. Data remain like a critical component for understanding the fishery sector, and the data and methodology section, which has been elaborated in this handbook, in essence, try to understand what are the socio-economic profiles of fishery actors, as well as how we can evaluate socio-ecological risk within the fishery sector itself. In this regard, section 4 try to provide sort of analytical ingredients or more generally practical guidance on how we can analyze and collect data that are needed in order to put into practice the conceptual framework that has been presented earlier. The section revolves around a number of key guiding questions that data must answer in order to paint a clear picture of the socioeconomic profiles of fishery actors, as well as the socioecological vulnerabilities associated to the population reliant on fishery, hence to understand the type of risk and vulnerability, but also the degree of vulnerabilities that the fishery population is facing. Many of the approaches outlined in section 4 of this handbook can be easily implemented. For example, through desk review, it is possible to collect a number of data and statistics that can inform the socio-ecological risk, as well as can characterize the profiles of the fishery population. Government officials may also improve their understanding of the socio-ecological risk in the fishery sector itself, for example, by conducting focus group discussion or key informant interview or semi-structured interview with key fishery actors. But it is also important, like, to acknowledge interministerial exchanges that can provide valuable insight, and specifically through the use of fishery registries or administrative data. And last but not least, it's worth noting that many ongoing survey initiatives can in a way be expanded in order to better target the fishery population, for example, through ad hoc questions that can improve our understanding of the main criticalities and vulnerabilities faced by fishery actors. Next slide, please. As I was mentioning before, section 4 is essentially structured around a number of key guiding questions that can be categorized under like broad areas. For example, for understanding the socioeconomic profiling of fishery actors, we may want to know what are the socioeconomic and demographic characteristics of the fishery population, as well as what are the types and level of vulnerabilities they are facing. Also equally important is to characterize the socio-ecological risk associated to a given fish. These include like a number of questions that must be answered in order to understand the status and trends in the fish stock biomass, in order to better anticipate what could be the potential socioeconomic impact of changes in the fish stock biomass, but also it is important to, in a way, anticipate to understand what are the current and projected climate-related risks that are likely to affect the population dependent on fishery. Last but not least, data and information is instrumental in order to understand how fishery management intervention to improve the sustainability of a given fishery can have a given impact on the population dependent on fishery, and therefore social protection intervention can in a way complement fishery management measures. There are a number of household surveys that can be used to, in a way, profiling fishery actors. These include, for example, labor force survey data, as well as household income and expenditure survey data, such as the LSMS-ISA surveys, that provide a number of key variables that can be used to profile the key characteristics of the population engaged in fishery. Variables, just to mention a few, include information on the type of jobs that the fishery-dependent population had, as well as the status in employment, whether they are on-account workers or contributing family workers, which are likely to face higher degree of economic risk, but also issues related to seasonality in fishery and how these the population dependent in fishery can in a way offset the off-season in the fishery sector by engaging in other complementary activities, but also asset owned, the fishing year, so on and so forth. All this information remains crucially important to profile the fishery actors. And the last slide I want to mention is related to the resources that are available across the different dimensions that are explored in this handbook. And among those that are readily available, such as national surveys or national climate change scenarios, Let me just very quickly mention a number of tools and approaches that can be implemented to collect additional information, such as the Fishery Performance Assessment Toolkits, which is extremely important to understand the socio-ecological risk, as well as the household survey model that can be attached to an ongoing data collection initiative to improve our understanding of the profiles of fishery actors and more generally the population dependent on the fishery sector. I'll pass the floor to my colleague Gunilla, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Gianluigi, and thank you, Luz. I shall speak lastly to section 5 of the handbook, where we have collated a few priorities that we think are key for going forward with this agenda. For the top two ovals in this slide, which are primarily about government internal administration, there are an additional 2 slides in this presentation, but which I will not have time to go into. So I'll just remain on this slide, and you can go into further detail when you receive the presentation. So starting at the top left oval, about shifting perspectives to enhance coordination between different ministries. Just as Annabelle was alluding to previously, we believe that an improved understanding and recognition of fisheries' broader societal contributions is required to incentivize collaboration. Fisheries can contribute to much more than the direct benefits for fishing communities, and I'm not saying that these are not important and should not be underestimated in their own right, but the broader benefits need also to be acknowledged to incentivize more investment and more coordination. So food and security for the population at large, in addition, additional employment opportunities, generation of export revenue, etc., and also climate and biodiversity benefits. These are all agendas that need to engage additional ministries beyond those in charge of fisheries. Then breaking silos will require establishing mechanisms for collaboration, such as joint programming and coordinating M&E frameworks, and perhaps even joint impact assessments. Importantly, also, better institutional coordination can enable the interoperability of information systems so that both sectors, SPJ and fisheries, can have more and better data. Legal issues to account for when different information systems should speak to each other. Going then to the top right oval on the need to align SPJ programming and implementation systems with fisheries policies and measures. This can take a number of forms. I'm just going to mention one thing which we think is key, and that is to adjust eligibility criteria of mainstream social assistance programs to account for the diversity of fisheries activities and the diversity of fisheries actors, and for vulnerability beyond poverty. Fishers and fish workers are not always necessarily the poorest of the poor, but they experience other forms of vulnerability, as outlined in the risk framework that Annabelle was showing, including to climate and other ecological shocks. And this is considering weather-based and the resource they depend on. Going then to the middle left oval on enhancing cooperation outside government, benefits from this collaboration with non-governmental actors include, for example, supporting outreach activities for the delivery of interventions, and not least for support with monitoring and evaluation. Another important aspect is to get a better understanding of any informal SPJ functions. As previously mentioned, we're focusing on formal SPJ functions in this handbook, but we need to account for and build on existing ones rather than replacing them. Going then to data and information in the bottom left oval, I'm not going to say much about this, Gianluigi has already spoken about it, but just emphasizing that this is a very important area for investment. As the old saying goes, rubbish in, rubbish out. And by that, I just mean that we need to have as good data as we can to inform well-designed programs. And it need not be all that expensive. You can build on traditional knowledge, you can add on to existing surveys, and there are other programs, many other programs and initiatives, as already pointing to in the chat, that can also be built on for collaborating and sharing data. Just want to highlight the need for socially inclusive and gender-sensitive socioeconomic data to increase the visibility of these groups and so that this information can inform policy development and the implementation of interventions. The right-hand middle oval on strengthening M&E, obviously lack of monitoring and enforcement capacity can undermine SP interventions in fisheries, particularly those aimed at incentivizing behavior change where there are conditions attached. Co-management arrangements have proved beneficial for such arrangements. I also want to say that more evaluation will be necessary to evaluate outcomes to attract investment, assuming outcomes are positive, that we are assuming they are. So M&E initiatives are important. Lastly, I'm just going to say a few words about funding, because some upfront investment will be required to achieve the longer term economic benefits, and there are a number of sources that can be explored. For example, highlighting benefits for climate and biodiversity of sustainable fisheries could help access such funding streams, and repurposing harmful fisheries subsidies has potential, and by that we mean those that contribute to overcapacity and overfishing in the sector. And there are additional financing options, like requiring the private sector who stand to gain from fish stock recovery to help fund fisheries management, or to help fund reskilling those who need to leave the sector for fisheries to be sustainable. That's my 5 minutes up, so I'm going to stop here, but happy to continue this conversation and the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. So now we are gonna go with Daniela.
Thank you, Yuko. Thank you, Yuko and colleagues. I'm very pleased to join today's webinar on behalf of FAO, as we acknowledge the World Bank's valuable contribution and continue our collaboration with partners on this important topic. So I will briefly share some of the FAO's experience, including recent and ongoing country-level work. But for more details and on our tools, data, insights, and initiatives, you can visit our website via the links that we will be sharing in the chat, but also at the end of my presentation. Next slide, please. So just to provide a bit of a context, FAO's approach to social protection for fisheries and aquaculture forms part of our Blue transformation strategy. And this work is grounded in many global agreements and conventions. A number of them are actually led by FAO that recognize and support the preventive, protective, and transformative roles of social protection for fisheries. Next slide. So with the support from the government of Norway, we have been working over the past 3 years to support a few countries to strengthen their institutional capacities to design, implement, and monitor social protection programs, with the focus on shock responsive and gender sensitive measures, in a way that we could improve the coverage and adequacy of benefits to fishers, fish workers, and fish farmers. We invest a lot on the evidence generation, on South-South cooperation, on the more like informal community-based approach, and different tools and methods. But in the next slides, I will just give you a piece of a highlight. Next slide, please. The highlight on that focus on the evidence generation that has been that we are providing through what we call the SOCPRO for Fish, Social Protection for Fisheries database. So this is a global assessment that is using a delivery chain approach of social protection schemes available to the fisheries and aquaculture sectors. They are both universal and sectoral schemes. And so far, we have collected data for 43 countries, including the countries of this project that I'm going to go more in depth later on. Several countries in the Mediterranean and 34 countries on the small island development states. So some of the highlights that I would like to bring to the discussion today is that we can find from this database that existing universal social protection programs are not designed to respond to the specific vulnerabilities of the sector. And I think this is very important because there needs to be an alignment between the needs and what the program is given. Now, the contributory programs form the backbone of the social protection in many of these countries. And while these are often mandatory, rates of registration and contribution compliance are very low, and there are significant barriers for participation of fishers and fish workers. No, there are legal, administrative, financial, and social barriers. And most universal programs are targeting economic, health, and life cycle risks, while fisheries-specific programs tend to target economic and sometimes environmental risks, leaving then fishers without the life cycle risk coverage, which is a problem. Overall, very few programs were found to cover environmental risks. And in the study, we found 5 of the 34 seeds specifically are targeting fishery sector in their social protection programs. And these include things like bad weather payment, microcredits, sickness benefits, special insurance, and concessional loan schemes. But several countries and regional level agreements have actually fishery sector initiatives that provide additional income maintenance and livelihood improvement benefits. So in summary, for many countries, due to the high rates of informality and the various eligibility requirements, restrictions and barriers of access, contributory programs, because of that, many fishers do not have coverage. And where they have some coverage, it's very limited and to certain types of benefits. And some certain benefits are actually lacking, such as maternity, child, unemployment being notable areas with gaps that we really need to invest on. And next one. So in each of the project countries, and I'm going to talk about Colombia, Paraguay, and Tunisia here, we've made some very important policy advances. And this has been actually supported through a continued engagement, evidence generation, peer-to-peer learning, and importantly, engagement with a multi-level stakeholders. So in Colombia, for instance, we've created the Interinstitutional Working Group for Social Protection called HIPRO, that has played a central role in driving these policy advancements for fishers and fish workers. So as the coordinating body, HIPRO has facilitated some critical studies, assessments, and recommendations. And through its work, we conducted a revolving funds assessment to explore financial mechanisms for the sector and developed fishers' socioeconomic profiles to better understand their needs and then match what the program can offer with the needs of fishers. A manual was also created to guide fishers in accessing benefits, and significant progress was made in integrating fisheries registries with social information systems, ensuring more effective and targeted support. So these efforts led to key policy actions. One of the most impactful ones relates to the SEDEVEDA, or the Unemployment Insurance Program to support fishers during closed seasons, which HIPRO was given the mandate to follow up. So the project also worked supporting recommendations for the extension of social protection coverage in a gender-sensitive approach to include las platoneras, or the women fish vendors, who play a crucial role in terms of in the fisheries value chain. And this culminated with a landmark achievement with the legal recognition of the fish vendors through the approval of a law ensuring their access to social protection. Next one, please. In Tunisia, we began by establishing a baseline on existing social security coverage for fishers, followed by a feasibility study on extending this coverage. To empower fishers with knowledge, we developed a user-friendly manual outlining how they can access social protection. And additionally, we developed a benchmarking study on social protection systems in the Mediterranean region, provided some comparisons and best practices to inform our approach. So these studies laid the foundation for meaningful policy action as well. And also we worked, created an interinstitutional technical committee that fostered collaboration among very key stakeholders. And a significant milestone was the formal recognition of the mutual societies as potential intermediaries for the social security contributions. And most importantly, this body of evidence that we generated played a crucial role in advancing discussions on the social security policy reform for the country, ensuring that fishers can then be better targeted and gain better access to social protection. For the next one, please. For the Paraguay, I would like to highlight the critical research and assessment that have shaped our efforts. Again, socioeconomic studies and fishers profiles for the Fishers Assistance Program provided gained and valuable insights into the realities of the fishers, and a fisher vulnerability assessment helped us to understand the challenges they encounter, while an evaluation of the social protection programs could examine their accessibility and effectiveness. So additionally, a study on alternative livelihoods during the closed season provided key recommendations and guidelines for the National Aquaculture Program, for instance, that then laid the groundwork for sustainable expansion of the sector. So building on these studies, we have had these significant steps to translate knowledge into action, and we engaged with multiple levels of government and secured the strong municipal support for the river corridor, for instance, in terms of the economic inclusion project, being then this as a catalyst for further investment in the sector. And this culminated with the revision of the program for the support of artisanal fishers, the PROBLUE program. On the South-South cooperation, and I'm coming to an end, we had the opportunity then to bring many countries together to basically share their experiences through a peer-to-peer exchange, where they were able then to learn from each other's experience. Next one. So just in terms of how we are moving forward. Now we have a new collaboration with the Monterey Bay Aquarium that will focus on innovations for fishers and looking into this policy reform for Tunisia. We will continue our work in Colombia through the implementation of the national plans of action on the small-scale fisheries guidelines, with a specific focus also on the unemployment benefits during closed season. And we are working also in Dominican Republic and Cabo Verde on integrated registries, anticipatory actions, and linking, making the interoperability of data. So just basically to finalize that this is a guiding element in our work, is the recognition that social protection is a very important dimension of equitable access for small-scale fisheries. But it's both something fishers and fish workers need better access to, but it's also something which itself enables more equitable access and therefore a sustainable use of aquatic resources. With that, and the next slide, I would like to thank you. And here you can find the links to our several resources that we have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Daniela. And I think that Annabelle will continue.
Yes, I'm going to be as quick as I can. I'm just going to talk very briefly about some relevant country work that we have underway at IIED. Next slide, please. So this work is part of a 7-year initiative called the Asia-Africa Blue Tech Superhighway, or AABS. It's led by World Fish and funded by the UK government. And broadly, it aims to unlock the potential of sustainable aquatic food systems for people, nature, and climate through South-South collaboration. Next slide. So IIED is co-leading one of the 4 work packages, which is focused on incentives for conservation and fisheries management, specifically in coastal areas. We're looking at positive economic incentives, so any policy, program, or other intervention that motivates coastal stewardship by reducing the associated costs. So this can be done through a range of different types of tools, including but not limited to social protection. We're in phase 1 of this project now, and the target countries for this first phase are Bangladesh, Tanzania, and Mozambique. Next slide. So our vision is to enable more effective and equitable coastal conservation and fisheries management through incentives that support better outcomes, not only for nature and climate, but for coastal communities too. We've got 4 main objectives. The first is to build knowledge on opportunities and challenges around incentive-based approaches in terms of their design, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation. We'll have findings coming in over the next couple of months, and what we're aiming to do is identify common lessons across these countries and eventually try to pull together some best practices. Our second objective is to strengthen the institutional, policy, and legal frameworks for these approaches in each country. So we're implementing that guidance in the handbook on rapid assessment of these frameworks, looking across fisheries, social protection, and other sectors. We're mapping relevant institutions, strategies, policies, and legislation, assessing their strengths, weaknesses, and coherence, and looking for opportunities to strengthen these frameworks to support better use of incentives. It's the third and fourth objectives that I really want to draw your attention to here. Most of this work is still being designed, and we really want to, if you just jump back a slide, we really want to invite collaboration and make sure we're building on and strengthening previous and ongoing efforts in this space. So the third objective is to strengthen incentives for stewardship of select coastal areas or fisheries through designing, evaluating, and adapting incentive-based interventions. The approach varies between countries. And then the fourth objective is to ensure financial sustainability of those interventions. Next slide. So focusing in on those 2 objectives in Bangladesh, as many of you will know, Bangladesh has made a heap of progress in efforts to connect social protection and fisheries management. Many years ago, a national social assistance program was adapted to directly compensate vulnerable fishing households with rice for the cost of seasonal fishery closures. There's been loads of work over the years to assess, expand, and strengthen this program. And so now we're looking for opportunities to build on this learning, to further leverage SPJ interventions for fisheries management and potentially for broader stewardship of coastal areas in Bangladesh. So we're planning to use the information that comes out of those assessments I talked about to shape this work, but we're also really keen to hear directly from country stakeholders what are the priority needs for intervention? Are there specific policies or programs that need work? Are there specific coastal areas that need work? Is it the system of registration that needs improvement? Are there opportunities to mobilize more finance for this? How can we move this agenda forward in Bangladesh? Next slide. In Mozambique, we're responding to national policy, a new ban on beach seine nets. And so we're looking to design incentives to support more effective and equitable implementation of that policy. These nets tend to be considered a destructive fishing gear, but they're also super important for coastal livelihoods and nutrition. So there's strong opposition to the ban. It could be really costly for vulnerable communities. And so what we want to do is work with key stakeholders to design and eventually test direct incentives for compliance with the ban. So we're following and building upon the methods outlined in the handbook for profiling relevant populations and assessing their vulnerability. We'd like to assess labour market demand, which can also inform the design. And then we're going to assess preferences of fishing households for different types of incentives and hopefully get a sense of what will work in different areas for different groups, etc. And we're also planning to identify and prioritise finance solutions for this approach. So, for example, can we work with government to improve efficiency in fisheries expenditure or to repurpose harmful fisheries subsidies as SPJ? So we're keen to hear from anyone who is doing relevant work within or outside of the bank. Next slide. Finally, very quickly, in Tanzania, we're taking a different approach again. We're evaluating an existing program, a community eco-credit program called Makuba, which under our conceptual framework would be seen as an informal social protection program. It's run by an NGO called Mambao, which establishes eco-credit groups with revolving funds in coastal communities. We're working with Max Planck Institute of Evolutionary Anthropology as well as Mambao to evaluate the social, economic and ecological outcomes of that program through an RCT. So the long-term goal, of course, is to support strengthening and scaling of the program. But what we're also trying to do is to start to address one of the issues we highlight in the handbook, which is the dearth of evidence around ecological or fisheries management outcomes of these incentive-based interventions. I'm out of time. I also just wanted to flag a question we're thinking about in parallel, which is how could this program be financed at scale? And to what extent could this model provide a reliable system through which to get more climate and nature finance to the local level? Thanks very much. Back to you, Luz.
Thank you so much, Annabelle, and thank you everyone for your stellar presentations and for sticking with your time. So we have a few minutes for questions and discussion. I've seen a very active chat, both providing resources on relevant issues and also asking specific questions. But I would like to start by first also inviting people to raise their hands in case that they want to ask a question. But in the meantime, while we receive questions, I would like to ask the participants about relevant ongoing dialogues or work in your specific countries about the collaboration on social protection and fisheries partners. Are you in your specific countries doing some work on this area? Please comment if you want. And also one specific question for the team who's working on this topic is what sort of follow-up activities will be important for your work in your specific countries? If you want to comment on this, please raise your hand or write in the chat. And this will be well received by the team. So while you prepare your questions, I've seen that we have more than 40 people in this in WebEx and 20 plus in YouTube. We want to thank you for your participation. And in the meantime, I would like to ask maybe Daniela or Annabelle about this intersection between social registries and fisheries registries. You've been emphasizing the importance of having interoperability of these registries. Personally, I've seen a lot of resistance on both SP actors and fisheries actors to connect and interoperate. So can you tell us a little bit of how you have done that work and what are the key elements to promote this interoperability between registries? Daniela or Annabelle?
Sure. Maybe I can start and then Annabelle can come in. Yeah, no, I think this is a very good question, and I think this is really an important area that we need to further improve, right? I think in the countries that we worked with, and more directly under the project, because we established these interinstitutional working groups or interagency collaboration, that actually facilitates a lot. Why? Because you create a space for a dialogue, and because in many cases sometimes they do not talk to each other, they do not interact. And having, for instance, one single registry where you have like specific data that you can monitor will really make a huge difference in the whole process. Not only in terms of better targeting, better designing the programs, but also in terms of monitoring the impact of the activities that you are putting in place. So I think this is key. I mean, the interinstitutional collaboration is key. Of course, you will do that differently in different countries. Every country will have their own dynamics, but promoting that is really important. So, for instance, in terms of for conducting impact evaluations, we did conduct an impact evaluation of the unemployment benefit program of Brazil. And one way that we were able to have access to the data was because there was a unique identification system, and there is interoperability, and there was collaboration across these different ministries, Ministry of Economy, Ministry of Fisheries, where we were then able to have access to the data and to evaluate to what extent the program of the unemployment benefit program was actually having an impact on keeping children at school, for instance, or avoiding IUU fishing because you were actually receiving an income during a closed season. So again, this interoperability is key, and then the registry is key. One of the main barriers is the informality now, and then how we deal with this informality and how we promote this registration. Maybe I stop here and allow Annabelle to come in. But happy to discuss a little bit more on this topic.
Thank you, Daniela. This is definitely an area of work. We have a couple of hands raised here. And I'm sorry, I'm not pronouncing your name correctly. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah. So hi everyone. This is like for some time that we never be able to connect. So it's nice to connect again for to see you all. First of all, thanks a lot for all of the presentation. I think it's really good in a way that you bring, you present the overview of the work that we have been doing over the past few months. In related to the handbook and also the different experiences from different countries in the world. So I think it's very, very useful. So I just want maybe a quick question because we, thanks to the team from the global team, Yuko, Ganula, Genguchi, and also Annabelle, who have also helping us in the first place in kind of connecting and carrying the overview assessment in Vietnam. But now we have been kind of collecting. It is luckily that we collect more than 1,000 household, fishery household in the Mekong Delta, and now we are in the process of analyzing the data. And I think we are hoping that we will see very interesting finding, especially looking at the labor transition, who's coming into fishery recently, who's moving out from fishery. And I think that this is, hopefully that will be very interesting, as well as also looking at the impact of climate change, salinity, heating, water, rainfalls, weather, and all kinds of things. So we are hoping that we can be able to connect the dot of different, things, pieces into there to see the impacts on income and employment of fishery household. And now we are at the same time quite analyzing this data. We also kind of planning to do the to carry out the qualitative interview with different stakeholder, fishery household, fishery association, policymaker. And one of the focus is when we want to look at the cost of the transition in terms of one is that to identify who will be able to transition out of fishery household, fishery employment, and what are the costs, right? If they're planning to move, because as you know that Vietnam is one of the country which is according to the FAO is like fishing capacity has been assessed and has been, granted with yellow card by European Union. So we are kind of, I know the government has introducing different programs to reduce the fishing capacity in Vietnam, and they want to support, the transition out of fishery sector among some of the household. And also like to see if they are not moving out of fishery household, right? What will be the cost of the applying different sustainable fishing practice? So we want to looking at at this dimension. So that's very since you are all here, quite a lot different national experience. So we just also want to learn from you if you have any any study. Especially looking at the cost of transition, so that we also very happy to look at it. and in order to incorporate in our pilot study.
Can you hear me? Yeah, thank you.
Yes.
Sorry to comment, just also for the control the loop. Yes, you are doing really interesting things and discussions are going. So like definitely, yes, we would love to learn more and the exchange, including the exchange of relevant resources, connecting with the team, which are also in the similar situation, or they are a bit advanced with the conversation. So yes, definitely yes, and thank you so much for sharing. And we will like follow up with you by that 30. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And Luz, sorry. Oh,
Yeah, no,
I just
maybe
came
we,
in. Yeah, sorry.
sorry, maybe we can give we can respond a question for Mike, or Mike had a comment. Mike, you want to come in?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you all for the very useful presentations. I have a question for you, Annabelle, and it relates to the work we did together in Myanmar, related to the recommendations for a new closed season for the Hilsha fishery, and also recommendations for fiscal reforms to generate around $90 million a year required to keep 1.6 million fishers out of the fishery during a 1-month closed season. So the result of that recommendation was that sanctuaries were put in place, 12 sanctuaries, and a new closed season exists, 15th of September to 15th of October, where the previous one was in May, June, July. So at least that was very successful. However, the social protection elements were completely ignored, partly because we have a military government in control who, on the one hand, were able to put in place the decrees, the laws about the sanctuaries and the closed season, but they were totally unable to assist with the social elements of the work. So bearing in mind that many countries where we all work have similar autocratic regimes, what would be the recommendation for promoting social reforms under those circumstances? Thank you.
That's a very difficult question, Mike. Yeah, not ideal circumstances to be working in. But I think probably this goes back to one of our main recommendations in the handbook, which is, regardless of the context you're working in, trying to support more coordination across sectors and a better shared understanding of the potential benefits of taking these social protection approaches, and kind of, yeah, trying to get everyone on the same page about, as we tried to do so, about the kind of making the business case and the economic benefits of taking those approaches.
Thank you.
So thank you very much. I just come in as Luz had to leave. I think you can hear me, correct? Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So yes, thank you very much, Mike and Annabelle. And again, yeah. And unfortunately, Luz have to leave as she is leading another meeting. But thank you, and also we are also running out of time. But we think it was a rich discussions, and we may have overflown with lots of information. At the same time, this is a starting point, so that we can actually have a follow-up conversation, really understand, connect with the more country teams, of course, inside the World Bank country teams working on the social protection labor and the fishery, but also external partners. So again, we will be preparing the post-event package with all the materials and the brief survey to be circulated with the team. And we definitely look forward to connecting with many of you, and so that we can join the force. This is actually still a fairly relatively frontier topics, which needs more efforts and passion to tap the potentials of the integrated cross-sectoral approach. So again, we very much looking for the continued collaboration with many of you, and to be the champions and the forces to advance this agenda. So with this, I'd like to close on behalf of Luz and on behalf of the joint team of the World Bank, IIED, and the FAO. I'd like to thank the participants again. Thank you very much, and goodbye.